Orders of the day numbers 2 and 3.
Education Amendment Bill, Committee Stage. Immigration Amendment Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Education Amendment Bill and the Immigration Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Afternoon, honourable members. The House is in committee. Kia ora tātou no reira te whare, inga iwi, inga rio, inga hawe wha tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Honourable members, the House is in committee on the Education Amendment Bill and the Immigration Amendment Bill. And members, we first turn our attention to the Education Amendment Bill. And the question is that Part 1 stand part, and it's debate on clauses 4 through to 39. I call the Honourable Member Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very excited about taking part in this particular debate today. And I'm particularly pleased that Anne Tolley is in the House for this debate today, because we know that charter schools are actually Anne Tolley's baby. Because Anne Tolley was working on charter schools before the last election. And so I'm looking forward to the contribution that she's got to make in this debate, because I'd like Anne Tolley to stand up and tell the House and tell the people of New Zealand why it was that she was working on charter schools before the last election, but miraculously it didn't make it anywhere near the National Party's manifesto. Why was it that charter schools were such a good idea before the election, that the National Party did a significant amount of work on them, but never told the New Zealand public about them? Why is it that the National Party blamed the cup of tea deal with John Banks for charter schools, when in fact it was Anne Tolley's idea all along? Even before John Banks was back in Parliament, this is what the National Party wanted to do. Because we know very clearly from this debate on charter schools that the National Party do not make decisions based on what's best for education. And that should be the very first question. When the government are considering changes to the education system, the first question they should ask is this going to help students? Is this going to improve educational opportunities? And charter schools fail. They do not do that. We should be focused on ensuring that every school in New Zealand is a great school, and that every New Zealander, no matter what their age, has the opportunities through education to achieve their full potential. That means from early childhood education, through schooling, through tertiary education, through second chance learning, every New Zealander, no matter how old they are, no matter where they live, no matter their background, should have the opportunity through education to achieve their potential in life. And charter schools does not do that. Charter schools is about increasing competition on the failed assumption that more competition is going to lead to better educational outcomes. And yet we know from evidence here in New Zealand and from overseas that increasing competition doesn't improve outcomes. In fact, there are countless examples to show where educational attainment is decreased as a result of competition. Even the Treasury argued in the initial stages of this debate that there was nowhere around the world where education systems with highly competitive elements, I'm paraphrasing here because I haven't got the exact quote in front of me, with education systems with highly competitive outcomes, highly competitive elements, improved student achievement outcomes, because we know they don't. Even the Treasury concluded that. And they concluded at the Treasury, so we're talking about people whose first objective is not necessarily the social good of the country. Even the Treasury, I'm sure Dr. Clark's going to have a few things to say about that, but even the Treasury argued that collaboration is more important to education. That, in fact, if we're talking about improving student achievement, then a collaborative education system is the place that we should start. It's ironic that the government talks about flexibility in the education system and introducing charter schools to give schools more flexibility at a time when they are imposing ever greater compliance burdens on our existing state schools and restricting their ability to deliver what is a world-leading curriculum that we have. Around the world, when people come to New Zealand, they look at our curriculum and they say, this is absolutely fantastic. So why is it that the government are undermining that by imposing all sorts of compliance requirements on schools, like national standards, for example, that undermine the very principles that our curriculum is based upon? So the real challenge that we should be addressing is, how do we allow every New Zealand school to be a great school, and how do we support every teacher in every classroom to be an absolutely outstanding teacher? All of the research from New Zealand and internationally shows us that quality teaching is the biggest in-school influencer of student achievement. We can talk for hours about the out-of-school influences, and there are many, and I acknowledge all of those. But within the school, quality teaching is the critical factor. The Teachers' Council review that the Minister herself released just last week highlighted the importance of quality teaching and made some very interesting observations about how we might be able to do better. The review of the Teachers' Council was arguing, in fact, Mr. Chair, that we should raise the threshold for quality teaching rather than lower it. That in fact we should be striving for a teaching profession that is more qualified, that is harder to get into, rather than deregulating the teaching profession in the way that the charter schools legislation does. It's fundamentally wrong. We've got research in New Zealand that demonstrates very clearly to us how we can lift student achievement through quality teaching. Te Ko Tāitanga is an outstanding program. It is an expensive program, but it focuses on teacher professional development, about how we can do things differently, how we can do things better. So what's the National Party's response to that? Well, they cut it. They cut it so that they could give $19 million to charter schools. They took one of the best programs that we have, admittedly one of the most expensive, but one of the programs that has a proven track record of success, and they cut it so that they could put money into a charter schools experiment. That's the National Party's approach to education. Take something that's working, take something that's successful, rip the guts out of it so that they can have an experiment somewhere else. And that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Teacher professional development. $19 million that's going into charter schools could buy a lot of teacher professional development, and the government are cutting the budgets for teacher professional development and have consistently since they became the government. There are real concerns around the requirements in this bill, or the lack of requirements in this bill, for teachers, those working in charter schools, to be registered and qualified in teaching. Now, people can be qualified in many great things, and they can be very talented in their individual field, but that doesn't mean they have the skills to pass on that knowledge to someone else. Teaching is an art in and of itself. Who said Tauhanari says? Well, I'm just grateful that I'm not relying on Tauhanari to learn anything. Because actually there's one thing that Tauhanari has taught me about being in this parliament. Sometimes it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than open one's mouth and remove all doubt. That's the one thing that Tauhanari has taught me in this parliament. It's a lesson that's been well learned on his part, I'm sure. But Mr. Chairman, quality teaching matters. There's nothing in this legislation that would stop a teacher who is suspended from teaching in a public school going and teaching in a charter school while that hearing is taking place. Nothing in this legislation that stops that happening. That's not going to be good for student achievement. That's not going to be good for student safety and for educational attainment. This is wrong. The evidence from overseas is wrong. Let's look at the research from Stanford University, where they found that, in fact, of all of the charter schools they looked at, only 17% of the outcomes were better, 37% of the outcomes of students were worse, and for 46% of students there was no difference at all. So how is it that this government are arguing that charter schools that have failed so dismally around the rest of the world are going to be good for New Zealand? We've got a very, very good education system in New Zealand. You wouldn't know that from listening to this national government, where John Key talks about how the education system is failing students and sticks a label on everything and sticks a label on all those teachers and says that they're failing students, when actually I don't know of one single teacher who goes to the school in the morning thinking, whose lives can I ruin today? Every teacher that we have in our schools goes there to make life better for students and to contribute to student achievement, and yet this government are all too willing to label teachers and to pick on teachers, when actually, if we want to improve student achievement, we've got to celebrate quality teaching, we've got to invest in teachers, we've got to provide them with opportunities to up their skills and to improve their practice. And this government go in the opposite direction and say, no, actually what we should do is just do away with the idea that a teacher needs to be qualified at all and let anybody into a classroom. That is absolutely wrong. There are other aspects of this legislation that are wrong that we'll discuss as we go along. It is wrong that a charter school should be able to make a profit, to take money that should be for education and give it and provide it in dividends to their shareholders. It is wrong that charter schools will not be subject to the Official Information Act and not have the same level of scrutiny. Even the Ombudsman was strongly opposed to that, and I absolutely agree with them. It is wrong that charter schools will not have to teach to New Zealand's world-leading curriculum. It is wrong that the students in Christchurch who have already been through so much will be used as guinea pigs in this charter schools experiment, because we know already that the government have got their sights set on establishing charter schools in Christchurch at a time when they are arbitrarily, by stealth, closing and merging existing state schools, and there is no day more than any other where we've seen the evidence of that than today, when the Minister is making her announcements about the future of those schools unilaterally. This is a bad bill.
I call the Honourable Member Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.